Father God, we thank you that you are with us, that you have called us to this special ministry to families, to men, and to single adults. And we are thankful that one of your servants, our brother, Dr. Everett Worthington, is with us to share from his experience, his knowledge, things that we know are going to be valuable to our ministry. So keep our ears and our eyes open and give him the right words to say to us tonight. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Yeah.
Dr. Worthington, the time is all yours.
Well, thank you, Claudio. Well, I'm really pleased to be with you all tonight and to talk with you about hope-based couple counseling. And of course, I'll be drawing from the approach that myself and Jennifer Ripley have developed called hope-focused approach to marriage or to ministry. So what I hope to accomplish in 30 minutes, it's very ambitious. I have way more slides than I can do. In fact, I put like 100 slides in the appendix, and Claudio is going to get those to you some way, either to have you download them or have them sent out, so that you'll have the slides tomorrow when I make the Wi-Fi work, if I make the Wi-Fi work, which is always touch and go. So by the end of the 30 minutes, I hope that you'll have a good sense of the hope-focused approach to couples, also that you'll understand what we call persevering hope as a type of hope, and that you'll gain some methods of working with couples. I'll also give you some of the research on hope, but not very much. I think I have one slide out of the whole thing on research. But of course, if you want to talk, just call me up about the research and I will talk to you for several hours about the research. I have no sense of boundaries in terms of research. So this is this is my objective for tonight. Basically, working with couples is often very discouraging. A study that Marty Seligman, former president of the American Psychological Association, did, showed that the two least effective types of counseling that anybody does are working with people with addictions and working with couples. So basically, individual counseling is about 80 to 85% successful, depending, on the approach and what people do and who you're working with. But it's only about 50% successful for working with couples or working with people who are having problems with addiction or substance misuse. So, knowing that statistic, hope becomes an important issue. It's an important issue in terms of the couples, because couples often come to couple counseling not because they want to get better, but because they want to say, we went to counseling, it didn't work, now we can get a divorce with a clear conscience. So a lot of separations and divorces happen, in couple counseling, and so couples often don't have a lot of hope. But because the success rate is relatively low for counselors or pastors working with couples, there's a kind of a loss of hope there too. Usually, most people start out really charged up about working with couples, and by the time they've seen maybe 25 couples, they're pretty much in despair that they're wondering if it makes any difference what they did. So hope, I think, is something that's really crucial in working with couples. Now, in understanding what hope is, there's a major theory of hope that was created by a guy that used to be a friend of mine. He died about 20 years ago, named Rick Snyder from Kansas. And Rick said that there are two types of hope, which he called willpower to change and way power to change. So willpower to change is a person's sense of agency. And if I lose the sense that I can create change, then I lose hope. But I can have all the sense of agency in the world, but if I don't know how to create change, if I don't know the ways to get to change, then again, I lose hope. So Rick said that people needed both willpower and way power to change. In my hope-focused approach, I added a third type because I thought that was very appropriate for couples, and I called it weight power. Weight in that there is a type of hope where you don't see change happening, but you want to persevere, you want to hold on. So what we have done this year is we've actually created a assessment instrument to assess people's weight power or persevering hope. So my thought is that the willpower and the way power to change are pretty much more young people's sports, because the change is always out in front of you and the possibilities are limitless. But, beginning to age someplace past adolescence myself, I've noticed certain things, like the floor is farther down than it used to be, and I develop these mystery pains in my body, usually when I'm asleep. I don't know how I get an athletic injury when I'm asleep, but I get these things, and my wife does have a chronic pain and a degenerative situation. So, we're coming up to the idea that change is not always possible. Sometimes, what we're called to do is just to persevere, even though the goals that we may have had all of our life have become impossible or seemingly impossible, unless God just does a miracle. So this is that third type of change, persevering hope. Not change, but third type of hope, persevering hope. And I think often that is really the key for couples, because they do lose hope. Not only do the individual partners lose hope, but because it's two people kind of negotiating a situation, sometimes one person can lose hope and the other person is still wanting to work, but the one person is pretty much given up on the relationship. So what I am going to give you in the slides is I'm going to give you the 4 items that we are using to assess persevering hope. We've done 4 studies with this and to develop the scale, and then we've done a nationwide longitudinal study where we've looked at people over 45 and followed them over the course of 3 months of successive treatments, and to try to look and see whether this persevering hope predicts changes over 3 months. So you'll be getting that whenever you get the slides. So, so let me just kind of catch us up, make sure we're all on the same page in terms of cognition. So cognition is what goes on in my mind, what mental activity. So, so cognitive psychology, which is not cognitive behavioral counseling or therapy, but cognitive psychology basically tells us that about 90% of all of our mental activity is not rational and reasonable and logical and slow and ponderous, but rather it's faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive. It is intuitive. It is nonverbal. It's something we sense. And so the 10% that is logical, about half of that, cognitive psychologists tell us, is done in service of these intuitive, unconscious type of processes. So basically, the idea of how do you change, it's a pretty inefficient process if you think that the way that you're going to change is to help people think differently about their situation. Yes, some people can change, but by thinking differently, cognitive behavioral approaches have been effective individually, not so much with couples, but individually. But mostly, I think what we do is we try to use our rational thinking to change our situation so that the natural situation is working for us. So if I want to change my character, for example, well, I could go to church regularly because that is one decision that I can make. And it puts me interacting with people who are going to support my character change week in, week out, day in and day out. So I can change my environment. I can change my situation. Like if I have a tempting situation, I could say, oh, I'm not gonna go there. I'm not gonna drive by that place that tempts me to eat ice cream or whatever my serious moral temptation is, which probably isn't eating ice cream. But so what I tend to think about is, how do you make changes in your life? How do you find a hero of what you want to do in your life? How do you plan coping strategies for the inevitable times that your willpower may fall flat, and make those decisions logically and prayerfully, so that I then will just face situations that will be supportive for me instead of tempting for me. So I will give you a list of a whole bunch of resources in terms of practical counseling. And these are going to be from two websites. One is our Hope website, which is called hopecouples.com. The other is from Forgiveness and Reconciliation and Virtue website that I have, which is Worthington-forgiveness.com. You'll have the links in your slides, and you will also have some of the things that are on there, which are like taped demonstrations of doing couple counseling to show you how I do it, how Jen Ripley does it. So those are, some things that are going to, I think, help you practically. So what I want to do now is to give you a sense of the hope-focused approach. And this is just kind of a quick overview in about the last 15 minutes that we have. So first of all, the research that supports this, there is research. It's an evidence-based approach. Back in 2004, it was named one of 4 evidence-based practices for couple enrichment. But we have also collected a bunch of information on couple therapy with this since then. So it is an evidence-based approach for both enrichment and for counseling. So here are some of the kind of the bullet points for the research. One is it is one of the two strongest evidence-based Christian approaches that exists. The other being the PrEP, the Christian PrEP program with the parrots, Les and Leslie. It is one of the most identified couple therapies that is used by Christian counselors. So in 2009, we did a survey of American Association of Christian Counseling members, and this was the #1 identified approach that was a Christian approach among those members. We just finished a big study, and again, the hope-focused approach was the most used. So it's being used a lot. We have extensive supporting materials to help you use this approach. You can find on that hopecouples.com website. And this is one of the few approaches that has looked at the individual components to try to figure out which parts of the method work the best, and strip away the things that don't work and leave the things that do work. Okay, that's my research pitch. So let's look at the hope-focused approach. The question I would have you think about is, what is it that causes a great marriage? What is it that causes a great marriage? So some people might say, well, it's having good sex, and that certainly helps. Some people would say it's great communication. A good marriage is caused by good communication. And good marriages have good communication. Maybe good marriages are those that can resolve conflicts very well, because conflicts happen in about 2/3 of the happy marriages. They happen fairly frequently. And there are about 1/3 of the happy marriages that rarely have any conflicts. So there's nothing wrong with a couple that doesn't have conflicts. But there are about 2/3 of the people do have those conflicts. Maybe what causes a good marriage is praying together. Frank Fincham at Florida State has a program of research in which he's looked at asking couples who are in counseling to pray for each other in a positive way, not a manipulative way. Oh Lord, help this person be a better person. No, not that, but something that's really benevolent toward the partner. And he's found that can really help troubled marriages if you can convince people to pray for each other. But all of those things are not really the cause of a good marriage. They're more the effects of a good marriage. So what is it that causes a good marriage? Well, at first, John Gottman, who's probably the preeminent marriage researcher, it came out with his famous Gottman ratio: 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative. Well, immediately a bunch of counselors set out to then help people to communicate more positively with each other, get that ratio up. Well, it turns out that all the researchers said John Gottman's crazy. He's actually was dropped on his head as a child and came up with this. But after 10 years of research, we found that John Gottman actually wasn't crazy. That 5-to-1 ratio is a very good predictor of who has a good marriage and who doesn't have a good marriage. It's not the cause, it's the effect. So you can't just get people to change the ratio and have a better marriage. So what is it that people came up with as the cause of a good marriage? Well, a good marriage is caused when couples can form, maintain, grow, and repair damage when it happens to a strong emotional bond between the partners. So a good marriage is caused by a good, strong emotional connection between the partners. All of those other things, the sex, the conflict resolution, the communication, comes out of that strong emotional bond. So, we want to think about helping couples to build a stronger bond. And the way that we do this is we try to promote hope, willpower to change, way power to change, and wait power when people don't see that change happening. The second major part of hope focus approach is that we try to teach people a strategy to work on their relationship. And this strategy comes out of Galatians 5, and it is faith working through love. And so we just take that apart and say, love is at the key to a relationship. And so what is love? Love is being willing to value your partner and not devalue your partner. So things that put your partner down, the eye roll, the, talking over them, those things are just death to love. But valuing your partner, treating that partner as a precious, prized pearl of great value, that's really the key. But also, people have to be willing to work on the relationship. So faith working through love. So work is putting energy into the relationship. And if people don't put energy into the relationship, that relationship is not going to be very good. It's like if two people get married and one goes off to Saudi Arabia for the next 10 years, they're still married, but their relationship hasn't advanced because they haven't put any time and work and energy into it. And the third part of that strategy is faith. So faith is a very robust type of faith. It's faith in the Lord, of course. That's key, especially for a Christian couple. But it's all kinds of faith. Faith is not seeing, is believing, even when the evidence that isn't obvious. And so the faith can be faith in the other person. It can be faith in a counselor or a pastor to be able to help. It's faith in the person's ability to change, faith that the relationship can survive. So there are many objects of faith, and all of those positive ones are part of that strategy. The last kind of leg under the table of a good marriage is that we have a theory of intervention that says that an intervention should make change sensible. And by that we mean able to be sensed. So if I talk to a person, then the person may misperceive what I say. If I talk to a couple, I can almost guarantee you, if this is a conflicted couple, by the time they get to the car on the way home, they will be arguing about what I said. It's just, 40 years of experience that tells you that. So what we try to do is to help them, with interventions that make it easier for both of them to retain what went on and not just rely on remembering the words that went on. So one example is an intervention I developed probably 40 years ago, but it's taking two chairs, and if we're working on intimacy, then I have the people stand up from their chairs and position themselves across the room as if the room is a scale where total intimacy, 10 points of intimacy, is them hugging in the middle of the room. 0 intimacy is with them standing facing the wall on the other side of the room, apart from each other. And then I will say to them, well, show me how intimate you feel toward the person right now. So they position themselves, and there's a lot of negotiation that goes on there, where one person feels more intimate than the other, but they have to agree on some distance. And then I will ask them, okay, show me where you would like to be in terms of intimacy. Well, they want to be closer almost always, and sometimes one person wants to be a lot closer than the other, and so they kind of move toward each other, and then they adjust to where they can stand it. And so then I stop them and say, okay, one of you, Mary, you stand still. John, where would you like to be? And he positions himself, and then we talk about that. And then, John, you stand still. Mary, where would you like to be? And we talk about that. So now they take their chairs and they assess how intimate do we feel right now? And they put their chairs where they feel now. Well, it's usually different than when it started out, especially if there was some kind of disagreement and negotiation that went on. And then I say, okay, let me challenge you. I'd like for you to talk about something in your relationship that makes you feel closer together. And they negotiate around, and maybe they'll find something like, oh yeah, when our first son was born, and it looked like he was going to die, and we were pulling together, and then the doctors got things together, and he pulled through, and we were so close then. After I can sense that the mood in the room is changing, I say, okay, so you seem closer now than you were before. Move your chairs where you are. So they move their chairs. Well, when a counselor makes them move closer, they will almost always, push back against the counselor. And so one of them or both of them will start fussing about something. So I let that build up. And after it builds up a little, I say, stop. You don't seem this close anymore. Move your chairs back. So look at what's happened here. We've created this metaphor of using space to represent intimacy. I could have told them the main point, and the main point is you have the power by what you do, what you choose to do, and what you choose to talk about. You have the power to affect the emotional bond between you. That is the thing that is the important part of a close relationship. You can make yourselves farther apart. You can make yourselves closer together. You have seen this by moving your chair in this session. Now, they can't go to the car and miss that because we have made change sensible for them. So there are a lot of these types of interventions. They always have something sensible. Let me just tell you the most powerful intervention known to couple counseling, and that is to do an assessment with them for about the first hour and a half that you meet with them, using questionnaires beforehand, but talking with them for, let's say, an hour and a half, getting them to communicate, taping it on their phone, so that, or your phone, so that you can understand, you can hear how they discuss things. And then between that session and the next session, write up a report about what you saw, about how faith, work, and love are playing out in their relationship. That intervention accounts for 1/4 of all gains in couple therapy. I know of no other intervention, single intervention, that accounts for 1/4 of all the gains. You see, though, it uses a piece of paper that they each get with a report on it, and it uses, all kinds of assessment techniques. So let me just, I see the clock on the wall that I'm going to stop blathering on. There are plenty more slides that you can go through and play with tomorrow. But hopefully you have a sense of what the hope-focused approach is about. It's about hope. It's about a strategy of faith working through love. And it's about making change sensible in the interventions that you use. So so I thank you for hanging in there with me, and hopefully you have some questions to keep me off the streets and out of trouble.
Dr. Worthington, and we're getting comments. We're getting comments from some of our directors that one illustration you just gave of using space, that was really powerful.
Well, good.
It's something so simple, but yet so powerful. So we want to thank you for that. I do have one question for you. You mentioned the importance of, or how change can happen when two people put energy into making that. Can you talk about a situation? Because many of us on here are practitioners, but we see situations where one person seems to be putting energy into making the change happen. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, so ideally, what I would always like to do is to get partners to both come in. Okay. Often, one of the partners doesn't want to come in. And I would say 90% of the time, it's the guy. You know, that's just a stat. But what I found over the years is I don't invite them to come in for counseling. I invite them to come in so that I will interview them with this assessment interview, and then I will give them an objective report that has recommendations of things they can do on their own to make their relationship better. So I find that probably over 75% of the the guys will come in for assessment when they wouldn't come in for counseling. So that gets them in. And then what happens is they get hooked on what happens in the counseling. And I can remember the very first time that this happened, I had a woman call me up and say, we need marriage counseling. My husband won't come. I said, well, let me talk with him if you don't mind. And so I told him about the assessment. He came in, they came in together, and at the end of giving them the report and talking about it, I said, so, you can work on this on your own, or we can continue and make an agreement to work a certain number of sessions on this. Well, what would you like to do? And he said, well, I want to keep going. And the wife, her mouth just dropped open, like, how can this be? So I think, as a helper, we don't want to just, give in to the idea that, well, this guy doesn't want to work or this woman doesn't want to work on the relationship. There are ways that we can try to engage them. And once they start, it can be a self-rewarding, process. So now, having said that, remember I started off saying, ideally, there are just relationships where one person is disengaged totally, and basically they're just waiting it out to get a divorce, and they're not, or they don't think they've done anything. They think it's all the other person's fault. And frankly, in real life, there's nothing a counselor can do about that, So if you can't engage them to want to come, I will work with the person who comes and try to help them do what they can to make a better relationship. Or, if it turns out the other person is determined to leave, at least help them deal with the loss.
As I recall, you have almost 20 books that have your name to it.
Actually, 42.
Oh, sorry, 42. I thought it was 17. I misread that. 42. There you go. So you have been busy writing. Instead of giving the entire list, of course, you can just go to Amazon or Google Dr. Worthington. But when it comes to this hope-based approach to counseling, what one book would you say is the one that I want you to read to get the whole point?
Well, for right now, I would say the InterVarsity Press book called Couple Therapy a new hope-focused approach. That's 2014. That's kind of our updated theory as 2014. So that's 7 years ago now. I mean, we wrote it in 2013. It came out in 2014. And so for right now, that's the best one. We have a contract with Routledge to write a new updated version. So this is going to be a secular one, though, the new one. Whereas as a Christian book, the couple therapy book with Jennifer Ripley and myself is the best one to go to. It's very practical. It's got over 80 boxed in new interventions that weren't in the first book that I wrote. And it's got like 50 of the what we called Hope Classics, and printed it up in the same script that Hope Classic does, but 50 others. So there's like 130 interventions, practical interventions that people can get out of that book.
Good. So that was one of the questions, and I think you answered it. If you have a list of intervention questions, and so there, the book would be the one to provide. If the biggest intervention is your report and good marriages are based on emotional bond, what are you looking for to give your report on? That's one of the questions that came in.
Yeah. So the assessment report is, I'm going to use the framework of faith, work, and love, and I'm going to see the things that they do well to promote love with each other. And those are questions that I'm asking, and ways that they're showing faith and ways that they're working on the relationship. And then I'm going to find ways that they're doing things that are harmful in terms of love, the times where they devalue and the times where they show a kind of a lack of faith in the other person, or a lack of faith in themselves that they can change, or their unwillingness to work on certain things. So that's going to be the framework. And what I'm trying to do with that is really, engage them in a process that helps them benefit by counseling. So that is not ever going to be, oh, we've done the assessment, we're done, we're great, we don't have to do anything else. So this is to get them into the process of talking about their relationship and doing things differently in the relationship.
I want to let all of you know that Dr. Worthington will be with us at Andrews University next year in July for the Adventist Conference on Family Research and Practice. The topic that he will be covering is forgiveness, which is another one of his areas of expertise and research, forgiveness. And it's a special one for me. In fact, I happen to own a copy of his book, Forgiving and Reconciling, which I asked him to kindly sign for me, and he agreed to do that. And I just kind of took it a step further, and I said, would you be willing to write to Claudio, who gave me all the ideas contained in this book? And I just thought it would be kind of a challenge. Well, I thank you, because he actually wrote that. Yes. And so I have a book that actually I gave him all the ideas.
He admitted it in writing.
In writing, yeah. I couldn't.
In writing.
When you get called on something, you just have to, own up.
Yeah, so we do want to make sure that all of our directors really promote the Adventist Conference on Research next year, because Dr. Worthington's is going to be speaking on forgiveness, and I've heard it. So it's so powerful. So make sure you put that on your calendar.
Besides Prepare Enrich, do you have any recommendations for resources for doing premarital preparation or premarital counseling?
I think a lot of premarital, the Prepare Enrich is the best assessment tool. Of course, the parrots have the SYMBIS system, Saving Your Marriage Before It Starts. So they are doing, I think theirs is actually a little more counseling and enrichment focused, whereas the Prepare Enrich is more assessment focused. So But I think that those are two good, preparation for marriage resources.
Dr. Worthington, here's another question that we have had come in. It's a pastor. So the pastor is asking, to what extent do we get involved with counseling versus passing them off to a professional counselor? Are there some indicators?
Well, I think a lot of times counseling is something progressive. So, people start having problems and they consult their family and friends, mostly their best friend. And most of the time it helps. But sometimes it doesn't. And so then they start to look for someone else, maybe a lay counselor, somebody has a good reputation. And most of the time that helps, but then some of them get passed on. You can see the progression. So, a pastor is often a very excellent resource and will help a lot of folks. When you find out that you're not being effective, that's a good time to start thinking about, I think I'm up against my limits here. And have you all ever thought about going to so-and-so as a counselor, or you may have your referral list, So that's the way I think about it. It's more like a funnel where the harder the case, kind of you keep kicking it up until the counselor gives up in the end.
We don't want to take advantage of your time. You've already given us more than plenty of time. And again, this is time for you to be with the family. So we're going to stop with this and thank you again for giving us so graciously and generously of your time. And for those who asked about Dr. Worthington's book on hope and marriage counseling, you will have it. If you order it in Amazon and pay for it, you can have a copy. So just make sure, because I know someone asked if they could have a free copy, and I said, well, yeah, if you pay for it, it will be free after you pay for it. But anyways, Dr. Worthington, thank you so very much for your time and your advice and guidance. And we wish you a happy 50th wedding anniversary and a good time with your family.
Well, thank you very much. And thanks for having me tonight. And of course, if somebody buys the book and they come up to me at the conference, I'd be glad to write the 7 new ideas after Claudio's, contribution are all due to you. So
that's my next book that I gave you.
You are so generous to us with your time and your talents, and truly we thank you, Dr. Worthington. You've been a blessing, and I don't know if you could see comments coming up in the chat, but our directors are commenting on what a blessing you've been tonight. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, and I enjoyed it a lot, and I look forward to being with you all in a larger venue and safely, of course, next year.
Yes, amen. Thank you. The rest of you, please remain, and then we will say goodbye to Dr. Worthington, and good night, and the best to your family as well.
So we will disconnect from Facebook